Now, cellular respiration is the process by which an organism uses oxygen to break down food molecules to get the chemical energy in the form of ATP for cellular functions. So, this means now that cellular respiration is a catabolic process because it breaks down large molecules into smaller ones. Also, this process is exergonic because it releases energy in the process. This is now the overall chemical equation of cellular respiration. A macromolecule, for example, glucose, with the aid of oxygen, is broken down into smaller molecules such as carbon dioxide and water, in which this process releases energy in the form of ATP. Hence, this is called again as an exergonic reaction. Now, if cellular respiration is the process of extracting energy from the food that we eat, in what kind of organism does cellular respiration, or in what kind of organisms does cellular respiration take place? Since all living organisms require energy, therefore all living organisms undergo cellular respiration. This means now that it includes the plants, which are autotrophs, and animals, which are heterotrophs, and of course other organisms such as bacteria. This also means now that the plants also need oxygen because oxygen is needed in cellular respiration. Now, for eukaryotes, cellular respiration happens in a special membrane-bound organelle called as the mitochondrion, plural mitochondria, which makes now mitochondrion called as the powerhouse of the cell. It is because it is where the energy is generated. A mitochondrion has the following parts: the outer membrane, which is this one, the inner membrane, which is this one, the space between the outer and then the inner membrane, which is called as the intermembrane space, and then the fluid filled space in the center, which is called as the matrix. As what you can see there, the inner membrane is folded, okay, and the folding are called as the cristae. Why does the inner membrane have to be folded? It is for the reason that for to increase the surface area, because it is in this inner membrane where most of the ATPs are generated. Now, the same with photosynthesis, cellular respiration happens through a type of chemical reaction which is called as the redox reaction. This reaction involves the transfer of one or more electrons from one reactant to another. Again, redox reaction involves the coupling of oxidation and reduction. When a substance is being oxidized, another substance is being reduced. When we say oxidation, this is the loss of electrons from a substance or a reactant. With that loss, there's also a gain of oxygen. So again, from this equation, from the reactant, this reactant now contains 6 molecules of glucose. But after the reaction, this product now contains 12 molecules of oxygen. So it has lost electrons, but it has gained oxygen. On the other hand, when we say reduction, this is a process wherein one substance gains electrons, or there is also a loss of oxygen in the process. So, again, from this reaction again of cellular respiration, this reactant has 12 molecules of oxygen, or has, yeah, that's correct, that has 12 molecules of oxygen. But after the reaction, um, in the product, it now contains additional electrons, but it has now reduced a molecule or some molecules of oxygen. From 12, it now contains only 6 molecules of oxygen. Now, to easily memorize and to not get confused, just remember the mnemonics LEO-JER. Loss of electrons, that is called as oxidation, and gain of electrons, or the JER, stands for the gain of electrons, which is called as the reduction. In general, this is how the pathway of cellular respiration looks like. There are two pathways and how this happens depending on the condition in the cell. But both pathways start with the same initial process, which is called as glycolysis. Glycolysis is the process of breaking down of glucose into pyruvate molecules. Now, if there is enough oxygen in the cell, the pyruvates will enter aerobic respiration. So it will proceed or it will go to pyruvate oxidation, Krebs cycle, and then the last one is the electron transport chain or the ETC. On the other hand, if there is not enough oxygen in the cell, the pyruvates will enter anaerobic respiration or commonly called as the fermentation. Now let us go to the overview of each part of cellular respiration. The first part again is glycolysis. It comes from the words glyco, which means sweet, and then lysis, to break apart, which means now that this process is the splitting of sugar. This happens in the cytosol of the cytoplasm. If there is oxygen, the products of glycolysis enter the grooming phase or the pyruvate oxidation, wherein the pyruvates are processed and the products are migrated to the matrix of the mitochondrion. Once inside the mitochondrial matrix, Krebs cycle takes place. Other term for Krebs cycle is the citric acid cycle. Lastly, some products in the different stages are used now to create ATP molecules in the electron transport chain through oxidative phosphorylation in the inner mitochondrial membrane. This process involves chemiosmosis or the movement of ions across a semi-permeable membrane, which is the same thing with what happens in photosynthesis. Now, going back, this is again the mitochondrion wherein the cellular respiration takes place. So these are the following parts. So outside the mitochondrion happens the glycolysis. When there is enough oxygen, the products of glycolysis enter the mitochondrion. Specifically, they go to the mitochondrial matrix. So this is where the Krebs cycle takes place. Now, after Krebs cycle comes last would be the oxidative phosphorylation, specifically in the process called as the electron transport chain, which happens in the inner membrane of the mitochondrion. Again, the ultimate goal of cellular respiration is to generate ATP molecules for cellular functions. ATP molecules can be generated in two ways. First is through substrate level phosphorylation, wherein in this process, there is a direct addition of phosphate group to an ADP molecule, forming now an ATP molecule. And this is done by an enzyme. So this is the enzyme. What the enzyme does is just it adds up a phosphate group to an ADP molecule, forming now an ATP molecule or a molecule having three phosphate groups. On the other hand, another way of making an ATP molecule is through the process called as oxidative phosphorylation. This phosphorylation happens in the electron transport chain portion of the cellular respiration. We use the term oxidative because it involves now the oxidation. When I say oxidation, the loss of electrons of the FADH2 and NADH molecules in the process. Also, in this process, oxygen is involved. Because of the oxidation of these molecules, the removed electrons power up now the movement of ions from an area to another area, making a gradient. Now, this potential energy will power up the movement or the power up the phosphorylation of ADP molecules to become ATP via the enzyme called as the ATP synthase. This sounds familiar because this is a similar mechanism with what happens in the production of ATP in the light reactions of photosynthesis.